Let's Talk Bitcoin is heard each week by thousands of people who are participating in the new digital economy. Our listener base of Bitcoin owners, miners, investors, technologists, and merchants is growing fast. We offer a limited number of short advertising slots in each show to keep our listeners engaged and to provide maximum impact for our sponsors. If you'd like to talk to us about Let's Talk Bitcoin, send us an email at sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
With the software, it's important that if you want to have people to be able to participate, that you need to break it down into small bricks, which is the Unix principle. Build a brick that does one thing and one thing well,
yes,
and then slot them together. And I also aim for simplicity of implementation, which is part of the worse is better school of thought in development, especially for system software, which has a different set of constraints to application software. With system software, you're really worried about, how the thing operates unseen, like with the threading model, how it all works internally on the kernel level.
Well, it's never used on its own. It's always used as a built-in component in something else. So you have to account for what this something else will do with its behavior, and you have to give it a very robust foundation.
Exactly.
And one of the things about Bitcoin Core, which is natural for a reference client, it always happens across all of the standards, is that it tries to do everything in one place. So, and they've been trying to pull apart into different modules. Recently, for example, the CLI was extracted completely from the rest of it. The JSON RPC client was extracted completely from Bitcoin Core. And now the wallet is being extracted from Bitcoin Core. Because when you try to do too many things in a complex system, then you have unwanted interactions, essentially side effects that occur when one thing gets called and it has a side effect somewhere else. Let me give you an example. If you want to use Bitcoin Core, the node software, as a peer-to-peer node to watch an address, you can't watch an address unless that address exists in your wallet. So now the dependency of the network node depends on the code in the wallet software. And LibBitcoin is fundamentally different than that. Each module does only one thing, very simply, very directly, with no side effects, right?
But I don't want to talk too much about LibBitcoin and dominate the thing, but yeah, I think it's very important in terms of development that we start to think, how can we get more people involved so that there's more oversight by community and developers, because people need to understand the actual decisions that are going down underneath. Mm-hmm. And if you have a big monolithic blob, it's very difficult for people to become and get involved in that. So if you split up into pieces, people can take that piece, make it their own, work on that without needing to understand about all this complexity that's going on around.
Right. You can't just change one thing and have it affect something else you didn't expect to.
Yeah, and the reason why I started to rewrite a library is a technical decision, because in the beginning we took the Satoshi code and we started to optimize it. We started to make changes, put Python bindings. But in the end, I really thought that Bitcoin as a piece of software that's fundamental with long term, we need a solid foundation. And I start to write that code, and
what was this?
In April 2011. And the thing is like to have that we need the people who are using Bitcoin to actually have the voice behind Bitcoin. It's not enough that we have like one core group of professional developers who say, we are going to make the decisions on behalf of the community, which by the way, with BIP 16, when that was happening, I was writing articles about it and getting a lot of criticism from developers, because I was actively encouraging the community to decide whether to switch to that version and support by mining that new version of the Bitcoin software, or keep continuing to use the old one. And the developers were saying to me that this is a development decision. This is an engineering decision, not a decision by the users.
Well, to a certain extent, it's interesting, because Amir, both you and Andreas are very technical, and I am technical, not very much, and Stephanie is technical, not very much.
Lost.
And so we've both been exchanging looks, because I think you lost us about 10 minutes ago.
What are they talking about?
So this is the problem, I think, is that how do you have an informed community make a good decision when there is no informed community because these issues are very technical. Question. I feel like I feel like Stephanie and I are in the land of cars, and you and Andreas are talking about the land of sewers that exist several layers underneath that. I don't know anything about those, So how do we make informed decisions?
It's about participation,
Yeah.
There's the open source onion skin model, which usually we can represent, like, you got your outside layers where maybe some guys come to the website, they check it out, and then they leave. But then maybe 10% of those actually download the software and run it, and then they drop to the next level of that onion, and then maybe 10% of those actually become your hardcore users, and they start to do testing, and they start to submit bug reports, and a few of those will actually become like maintainers doing packaging and actually participating.
So it's about being inclusive.
It's about being inclusive.
It's also about the adoption curve, which is that if you make it easy for people to adopt Bitcoin as users, you want to make sure that a certain percentage, 0.1% of those people actually download and compile the code. And they'll do that if it's easy to compile the code. And the experts among them will then go a bit further and do a bug report. If it's easy to do a bug report, if you can read the code, if it's modular. So what Amir is talking about and what he's doing with LeBitcoin is really fundamental, because if you make the system more approachable, that means a larger percent of all of the people we're bringing into this ecosystem and this community will end up writing a bit of code. And that means that in the future, we won't have a core developer group of just 12 or so people. We'll have a core developer group of 200 people, like we have in Linux, for example. And there you have a couple hundred core developers, but then you also have thousands of other developers who are doing very deep testing on individual components of the code. Just like Jeff Garzik, for example, who's one of the core developers in Bitcoin, spent his entire career before this dedicated to one part of the Linux kernel in the network stack, and he worked just that one part, and he was part of a community of thousands of developers.
Jeff Garzik is actually a very good Linux kernel developer.
Yeah.
He's one of the best.
Absolutely. And he's brought that experience to, and he's one of the people really pushing to include more and more people in the development community. But the problem is when you start with a hairball, it's hard. And, despite the dedication, the 12 people who are in this, they're overworked. They are overwhelmed. They have to not only deal with feature requests, but also all of the bugs and all of the optimizations that need to be done and make some very difficult decisions that seem like engineering decisions in one context. If you look at them from a different perspective, they influence what applications you can build. So they're roadmap decisions. And if you look at them from a third perspective, they influence some of the economic implications and social implications of what Bitcoin can do. So then they're actually political decisions. So you have to make decisions that are engineering, architectural, roadmap, and political decisions. And no one should have to have that burden of making that decision across an entire ecosystem.
And also, if you want to actually focus on the work that matters and really develop a good piece of technology, it's a creative endeavor. Something that you can't be dealing with the day-to-day grind of bug reports and small fixes and so on. It's something you really need to sit down, chill out, clear your mind, and think and really get into that headspace where you're able to discover. And it's kind of difficult to describe, but it's the same as if you're a writer or an artist.
Yeah.
There's a difference between programming 9 to 5, just fixing bugs or doing little small feature requests without any long-term perspective about where your code wants to go, versus actually thinking on a deeper level about the real ramifications, and also a lot of this comes from experience as well.
It's very easy for certainly for me to have an opinion, and I just want to make it clear that I know very well my opinion is worth absolutely nothing here. The only thing that matters in terms of Bitcoin implementation is the code submitted, right? And opinions are great, but unless you take that opinion and write some actual software and do a pull request, I don't want people to think, or even say, as I've heard many people say, go to the core developers and say, hey, Andreas said so and so, why aren't you doing it? And they give them the correct answer. We accept pull requests. If you think what I'm saying is a good idea, write some code. And if you can't write it to Bitcoin Core, write it to libbitcoin, write it to Bitcoin J, write it to BTCD. But, my opinion is worth nothing without code.
Yeah, that's also the thing as well. We can't just be always talking about what would be better.
Yeah.
The only way that we can change the situation is by actually putting out good software that people want to use. And the way that we're going to do that is by playing on our strengths, what are the properties or principles of our software that people would want to use it, for instance, stuff with the internet, it's an open platform, that's why it's better than TV, you consume your own culture among your peers, or software like BitTorrent or Linux, there's always trade-offs, between different types of software.
So you're saying opinions mean nothing. You have to put in requests for code if you want anything to actually change, and that makes sense.
Or write your own.
Write your own, but I'm not going to do that. I don't even know how to go about suggesting some different code for Bitcoin or what to suggest. I'm way more likely to switch to an altcoin or something if I see some feature that I like more.
Well, that's an important contribution too. You're signaling essentially decisions and market decisions with your choices of what things attract you politically or in terms of your opinion. And so if people start switching to an altcoin, that sends a very strong message. I'm not saying people should switch to an altcoin. I'm just saying that the choices people make and which wallet they use, even which version of Bitcoin client they download, that in itself is a consensus action. That is you deciding, I want to be on the latest fork with the latest code, which means I like the changes that the development team added. And if you don't make that upgrade, you're saying, I would like to stay where we were before. That's how the consensus mechanism is spread between users, wallets, web wallets, merchants, developers, and miners.
Especially as we get more people on board, though, they're not going to know that.
It's a matter of percentages. So what you do is you assume...
Right, and the new user percentage, once we get mass adoption, then the percentage of new users who have no clue about this stuff is going to be massive and overwhelm the people who actually are informed about what's going on.
But that's okay, because you're also going to bring in a lot of new developers. And we're already seeing that. I mean, the number of developers in this space is exploding. People who are interested
now. But not as much as the number of people who have no clue. That's true. It's like voting. It's most people have no clue. They see a name at the top of the list and oh, that sounds like a stately name. I'm going to vote for that person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's you get this, it sounds like democracy and it sounds like it's fair, but most people really have no clue what they're doing.
Well, even for people who do have, coding experience, Amir, you're not a core dev, right? What does it take to become a core dev?
A core dev is someone who writes code for the Bitcoin core. It's not like Gavin Andresen pulls out the sword and puts it on your shoulder and says, I hereby anoint you core dev. You can call yourself a core developer if the code you wrote has had an influence on Bitcoin core. That's all it means. Someone who develops for the core client. It's not a title.
Most people don't know that either.
Yeah.
This is what I'm asking is who decides what's included in the code, what's included in the core?
It's a consensus mechanism. You write a useful patch, you submit it on GitHub, and if the developers like the patch and is tested and works out and solves a problem.
A new developer coming in trying to solve a problem that the existing development team might not know has to have the idea vetted by the rest of the development team before it can be included.
All the developers have to have the ideas vetted by the rest of the development team. If Gavin Andresen wants to make a change to the code, he does a pull request just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's a popularity contest.
It's not entirely. No, it's not a popularity contest. It is in some ways, but at the same time, you are submitting code, and if your code works and it solves a real problem that people are trying to solve, or it fixes a bug, it will be included, and you are then a core developer. The ones who do this repeatedly build credibility among the community, and they get their code accepted more often. And keep in mind, the core developer group is not a monolithic group at all. There's a lot of diversity in it. There's a lot of disagreement in that group. If you follow the debates and discussions, sometimes it gets pretty damn heated even among the core developers. So you can find a very broad range of opinions in there as to how things should be done. And these opinions eventually get translated into code. And sometimes there's competing code for the same thing.
There is a lot of power there,
Oh, for sure.
Gavin Andresen took me off the security mailing list as a political slight against me, and they were all ganging up on me at one point, and pushing, and that's why really I didn't go and cooperate with that group. I was like, okay, I go and do my own thing, because I've been involved in a lot of open source projects, and I can see a lot of repeating patterns often early on, you know, so I'm always a bit apprehensive to invest like tons of my energy and time where I think that I'm going to be held back a lot.
Right.
You know?
Well,
so
I mean,
that's matter how good your code was.
Exactly. It's part of the political process, you know, having that you know, that energy to go and actually do, and you know, and also like as a coder who wants to maintain my independence because I want to represent a certain voice within the community, it's important that I am unconstrained, you know, that I have the freedom.
And see, like I would probably agree with a lot of your political views, but like I didn't know that you were kicked off of the mailing list, you know, like
but more importantly, you have an alternative implementation.
Because I don't know how to code, and so...
Well, so let's talk about alternative implementations. In practice, what does this mean? I mean, how do I...
It means that if you tell the wrong person to go fork themselves on an open source project, sometimes they build something that's better than the original fork.
Okay, so but let's talk about that in practice. Bitcoin has been underway since, you said, early 2011? Okay, so what is it being used for at this point? What type of application can I find where it's actually using that as opposed to the more mainstream implementation that is not modular?
Do you know this company Airbits?
Yeah, I saw it at this event today.
Yeah, they're using Bitcoin for their wallet. And there's a guy as well, he's developing a hardware project. He has a set of different. It's got. So
are these all new projects?
Airbits is a relative new project.
Airbits is something they're trying to like really make Bitcoin mainstream and ease of use. Like they're doing apps that will like automatically fill in restaurants near you that accept Bitcoin and things like that.
And it's very nicely designed software as well. Mm-hmm. There's also a guy who's developing a range of hardware projects. He has like a 2 million investment, and he's using libBitcoin for that as well. And also in Dark Wallet, we're using libBitcoin. So we have
so it's getting there.
Yeah.
So that right now there isn't anything right now, but there's stuff in the works that's going to use it.
And actually, a lot of the decisions that I've arrived at actually came from my experience when I was developing Electrum. The reason I originally became an Electrum developer was to switch Electrum to a libBitcoin backend, because there's all these different wallet projects now, like Hive Wallet, Electrum, you know, libBitcoin, and we have different focuses on the full part of the stack. Like Hive is really thinking a lot about the interface, how to get that experience with the market, and thinking about how the people interact at the front level. Electrum is really thinking about, on the desktop wallet part, about the features underneath, like the two-factor, about making it modular so people can plug in different interfaces, port to different platforms like mobile phone and so on. Whereas libBitcoin is thinking more about the blockchain part, the server part. Like that's also a difference with the other Bitcoin implementations, except maybe BTCD, which also is a very interesting project, because I see a lot of the concepts they develop also in parallel, you know, so they're also thinking about things nicely too. And we want to optimize Bitcoin for the server, because that's where I fundamentally believe the blockchain is heading, is to the server. And it's something we can continue to deny and see how can we optimize it further for the desktop and so on. But we have to face the reality, which is that not all people are going to run the blockchain on their server. And even if it takes 10 minutes to validate, that's 10 minutes too long.
Yeah. Well, there's other implementations also that have broad commercial use. So for example, I know a lot of companies that are using server-based implementations. So they have large multi-node resilient connections into the blockchain network, are using Bitcoin J instead of Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin J is a project developed by Mike Hearn, who used to be at Google, but I think he's now working full-time on Bitcoin J as that project and as a core developer.
But my problem with Bitcoin J as well is the Mike Hearn, he works for Circle. You know, when he talks a lot, he talks...
That's Jeremy Allaire's new kind of mainstream financial...
and Jeremy Allaire takes...
Who said at the New York Bitcoin conference that Bitcoin is going to be integrated, is going to be part of the world banking system, and a bunch of...
Jeremy Allaire said we need to leave these libertarians behind, these crazy guys. We need to reject them. Bitcoin needs to become mainstream. And
welcome to the PayPalization of Bitcoin.
Exactly. And Mike Hearn is part of that crew. Now,
well, how much part of that group? I mean, because
he holds those ideals and values very much so. And as software developers, we are encoding our values and ethics in the software because software is art.
Without a doubt.
It's not something that's functional, yeah? And we really, if as developers, like, you are representing some voice, you know. So it's like, and this is also a problem that is going to happen in the future, as you know, like, if we put too much of our infrastructure into centralized development groups surrounded by proprietary ecosystems, that corporations who are funding the development of this Bitcoin software will come and put pressure on the developers, say, you know, we need to have features, we need to protect our liability.
It's more about the opposite, which is, for example, and this will happen very soon, somebody decides whether they want to implement a CoinJoin interface into the software, and then the corporation that's funding this says, oh no, that sounds way too risky.
Terrorism, money laundering, porn, drugs.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
Yes.
Please, who's going to protect us from the bad guys?
Yeah, and so somebody is thinking of the children. They're thinking that the children should probably have some freedom when they grow up and not be slaves to the machine.